Hi, I'm Brian E. Denton, author of the book A Year of War and Peace and the poetry collection Inspiration. Welcome to my channel. This video is part of a series I'm doing on Dante's Divine Comedy, wherein I plan on reading through and offering my thoughts on Dante's Divine Comedy at a rate of 3 cantos or chapters per week. This is my independent contribution to Baylor University's 100 Days of Dante Project, where they're doing the same thing. Before we get started, I'd just like to say to any new viewers, welcome, and also please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. As it happens, I'm trying to get up to 150 subscribers by the end of September. That's just in a few days. Lucky for me, however, I'm at 149 subscribers at the time of this recording, so it's totally doable with your help. Thank you so much in advance for that. Now, each video is going to consist of 3 parts. We're going to have this introduction, then we're going to have a synopsis where I go over the major themes, the plots, and the characters. And then the third part will be called the takeaways, wherein I would just offer my own independent thought on the canto. And after that, I'll wrap it up. All right, so let's get right into it. Dante's Inferno, Canto 10. Having turned right at the conclusion of the last canto, Virgil now leads Dante the Pilgrim between the ramparts and the torments of this ring of hell, the 6th. Dante, contemplating the tombs that he sees here in the cemetery, he asks Virgil whether he can see who lies within these tombs. Virgil responds that the lids to these tombs will remain unsealed until the souls return from Jehoshaphat with the bodies they have left above. Further, the souls collected here are the Epicureans. What a win for the Stoics. It's at this point that a voice emerges from one of the tombs, and the voice says that he recognizes Dante's accent, and that the accent belongs to a noble city that perhaps, quote, I treated too cruel. Dante turns to cower behind Virgil, but Virgil tells him to stand tall, and that there in the tomb lies the shade of Farinata. Farinata is indeed there, and he's standing up in his tomb, his brows and his chest raised proudly to these foreigners to the city of Dis. And then what happens is basically Farinata and Dante the Pilgrim get into a little verbal tete-a-tete. The upshot of this tete-a-tete is that Farinata and Dante, they belong to 2 opposing, indeed warring, factions in the highly polarized Florentine political scene. Their tete-a-tete, however, is cut short by another tomb dweller who pops up to speak with Dante. And Dante recognizes this man immediately, though the man does not reveal his name. And he recognizes him because he calls him the father of Guido. And we'll learn much more about what this means later on in the characters and theme sections, so we don't need to talk about it right now. But basically, the guy who just popped up, he wants to know if his son is dead or alive. And then Dante pauses to consider what to say, and the father considers this to mean that his son is indeed dead. And so, as a doting father would do, he retreats back into silence and into his tomb. Proud Farinata, on the other hand, he just jumps right back into the conversation with Dante right where he left off, as if nothing happened. And the 2 of them, they talk more politics, and Farinata defends his life as it regards the political battles that went on between his party and Dante's party. Dante kind of changes the subject a little bit by asking if Farinata is aware of the things that are going to happen in the future, particularly as it pertains to Florence. And Farinata says that he can only see the things that happen at a distance. So that is to say, he can see the things that have happened in the past, and he can see the things that happen in the future, but the present is much less clear to him. Dante then tells Farinata that he wants Farinata to tell Guido's father that Guido is still alive. But at this point, Virgil interrupts their conversation, and he summons Dante to continue on their journey. Before Dante leaves, though, he asks Farinata, who else is entombed down here with you? And Farinata responds that there are thousands entombed with him. And of these number are included Second Frederick and the Cardinal. Then he drops from sight back into his tomb. As they resume their journey together, Virgil soon notices that Dante looks a little bit upset. And so he asks Dante, why are you so bewildered? And Dante gives his answer. And then Virgil, as a kind of consolation, he informs Dante that, listen, you're going to make it to paradise, and when you get there, you're going to talk with Beatrice, though he doesn't use Beatrice's name, but it's definitely her that's implied here. But Beatrice is going to teach you about the lessons of the journey of your life. And with that, our 2 heroes continue on, this time directing their footsteps to the left. Let's start with Dante the Pilgrim. Dante the Pilgrim so far, I think for the most part, has been, if not exactly cowering, then at least traveling behind Virgil, as if he's seeking protection from Virgil, who is serving as his guide. But in this canto, you'll note that Virgil actually pushes Dante forward in his confrontation with Farinata. So I think this could mean that Dante the Pilgrim is becoming a more self-sufficient and confident character, or at least Virgil seems to think that he is. What do you think? One last thing about Dante before we move on to the other characters in this canto. What I'd like to talk about, once again, is that the Divine Comedy is unlike other epics in that it's not quite an action-adventure poem in the traditional sense. This topic has generated some welcome controversy down in the comments, and I think that's great. However, I do think that this canto really does offer more support from my point of view, that this is not a traditional epic poem in the sense that it's not an action-adventure story. And here's what I think. What we have here is Virgil telling Dante at the end of the canto that he shall stand before Beatrice to discuss the lessons of the journey of his life. Well, Beatrice is in paradise, so Dante the Pilgrim will get to paradise. And by extension, he'll also get through Purgatorio and the Inferno. So this shows us that there's no real physical threat. There's no threat to his well-being throughout this poem. What I don't mean to say at all is that Dante the Pilgrim's ultimate physical safety takes away anything from the drama of the poem. Because again, what Dante the Pilgrim is on here is a great spiritual pilgrimage, a great spiritual journey, a great spiritual adventure. And he remains in great peril spiritually, if not physically. The next character, of course, is this guy Farinata. Like some of the other denizens of hell, this man is a real person too. His name is Farinata degli Uberti, and he was born in Florence, and he was part of the Ghibelline political faction. You'll recall from previous cantos our discussion of the two factions of the Guelph party, the white Guelphs and the black Guelphs. It was pretty bad between those two. But it was even worse, much worse, between the Guelphs on the one hand and the Ghibellines on the other. So sharp, in fact, were the differences between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines that they actually went to war with each other. And we see these wars that they had referenced in today's canto. Basically, the two of them represented two different political factions, as we've said. One, the Guelphs, they supported the Pope, and the other, the Ghibellines, they supported the Holy Roman Emperor. We won't go any deeper, but just know that there were great differences between these two. The differences were so great, in fact, that they went to war with each other because they couldn't resolve these differences. Now, Farinata's character here represents the sin being punished in the circle of hell. And that sin being punished is, as Virgil tells us, the sin of hearsay. Hearsay, according to the Catholic Church, is the obstinate post-baptismal denial of some truth, which must be believed with divine and Catholic faith, or it is likewise an obstinate doubt concerning the same. This canto doesn't show Farinata engaging in any type of hearsay, not really. I mean, I suppose you could interpret his Ghibelline support for the Holy Roman Emperor over the Pope as a form of hearsay, but not really. What Farinata does show, however, is pride. So perhaps what Dante is saying in this canto is that pride, an elevated sense of one's own superiority, is the root of all sin in general, and of hearsay in particular. Where do we see Farinata's pride? Well, we see it in the presentation of his character. He shows pride in his familial background in line 42. He raises his eyebrows, a sign of pride, in line 45. This is very discouraging to me because as I edit these videos, I notice that I too raise my eyebrows a lot. Finally, upon his introduction, Dante the poet describes the raising of Farinata's chest and the raising of his brows as a sign of excessive pride. So, pride. Farinata in this canto, he shows that pride is the root of sin, the origin of hearsay, which is the obstinate denial of truth or doubt of the same. The next character introduced in this canto goes unnamed, but you'll remember him as the guy who popped out of his tomb to inquire about his son Guido. And this guy was an actual real character too from Florence, and his name was Calvicante dei Calvicanti. And this guy was a rich Florentine Guelph, and he was father to Guido, as we said, and Guido just happened to be one of Dante the poet's best friends. What is most interesting about this historical character is that Calvicante's son, Guido, was married to a woman named Beatrice, not Dante's Beatrice, a different Beatrice. And this Beatrice was the daughter of none other than Farinata. So these two, Farinata and Calvicante, were in-laws. And yet, so far as we know, they never spoke to each other. And they did this out of hatred and distrust of one another. And this was all due to the rabid factionalism between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. So they placed their loyalty to political party over family and over universal religion. There are two other characters in this canto, and they're only mentioned. Frederick II and this cardinal guy. We're going to learn a little bit more about these characters in the takeaway section, so we'll talk about it then. Just note right now that they were both political actors. One last thing to note thematically about this canto is that once again we are moving leftward at its conclusion. What do you make of that? I'd like to focus on just one takeaway for this canto. And the reason for that is I believe that this canto, Canto 10, has some profound implications for my home, the United States of America. That takeaway, if you'll allow me to engage in a little eisegesis, is that one should not allow one's politics to become idolatrous. The results of political idolatry are dire indeed. They are spiritually damning and secularly ruinous. I mean, really, we're moving rather quickly into some Lucan lunacy here. We need to be careful. Here is my argument for why I believe that this canto is really about making idols of politics and the dangers therein. First, all the characters in this canto, save our two heroes, are political figures. You have the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. Further, almost all the talk in this canto is about politics. Witness Dante the Pilgrim's tête-à-tête with Farinata. There's nothing wrong with politics or political talk per se. Obviously, in fact, Americans, and indeed all members of democratic polities, need to engage in disagreement and political back and forth. That's just a given. Political debate is good. It should be encouraged. It's the elevation of politics above all else which is the problem here. It's making idols of politics. It's making your political identity your core identity, your guiding force in all of life. This is the problem. The question then is Dante saying that the figures in Canto 10 have made idols of politics? The answer is an emphatic yes. Consider lines 85 through 87. These lines are Dante's response to Farinata's questions about why Dante's party is treating Farinata's party so hatefully. Look at Dante's response. Then I said to him, "The havoc and great slaughter that dyed the Arbia red caused them to raise such prayers in our temple." What we see in this response is the deliberate confusion of religious and political terms. The prayers here are not prayers in the traditional spiritual or religious sense. What Dante is talking about here are political debates and political arguments. Likewise, the temple mentioned is not a temple. It's a political body or a congress, some sort of legislature where the political parties meet. Only again, so important, so idolatrous are the politics that Dante the poet likens them to a temple. And what was the result of this elevation of politics above all else between the Ghibellines and the Guelphs? It was constant war. It was constant destruction. It was banishment. It was property violations. It was bloodshed. Americans must heed the lessons of this canto. We're getting too far along down the path towards outright battle between our Guelph and Ghibelline factions. Just scroll the hateful, vituperative language on social media, or the idolatrous way we talk about our political leaders in this country. I mean, really, every single presidential election cycle of my adult life has turned into some messianic drama where our guy alone can offer the nation salvation. And when it gets to this point, political violence is not too far behind. For who among us can tolerate the destruction of our country, which will certainly happen, we're told, if the other guy gets elected? And for those of us who favor human liberty and peace and prosperity, there's nothing that runs so contrary to these lofty goals than war. War destroys commerce. War destroys families. I mean, we see this in today's canto in the story of Farinata and Cavalcante. So what did the warring factionalism between these two get them? Terror and violence on earth, and eternal damnation to boot. That's not good. This is not an argument against political disagreement. Political disagreement is to be encouraged. This isn't even really an argument for civility in political disagreement. This is just an argument against political supremacy. So when you feel yourself getting heated in a political debate, just cool yourself down by reminding yourself that politics is not God. And further, start thinking about the wars between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. These wars lasted for centuries. Is that what you want for you and your country? This is not a future that I want for myself or for my country. So I urge everyone out there to go pick up a copy of Lucan's Civil War. Now you'll remember Lucan from Limbo. Dante includes Lucan as one of the great poets of all time, and I think you will too once you read this. It's going to tell you where things are heading if we continue down this path of destruction that we're on right now, in terms of political polarization and hatred of the other. And so I'm going to conclude this video with a few passages from the opening of Lucan's great poem. Of civil wars and worse, waged on Emathian fields, of crime made law we sing, how a powerful people turned on its own heart its conquering hand, of ranks of relatives, and a broken pact of rule that dragged a shaken world with all its strength and contention to win a common guilt, of standards opposite hostile standards, partisan eagles and spears shaking at spears. What fury, citizens, what anarchy of iron. This wasn't a people who tranquil peace could please, who could let arms lie, let their liberty feed them. So anger flared up easily, and driven by indigence, crime came cheap. By steel one could gain great honor and overpower his fatherland. The measure of right was might. Laws won popular votes by coercion. Just order was disturbed by councils and tribunes. The rods of office were bought, and the people auctioned off their favor. And the fatal polling around the city brought back year after year the Campus Martius to the auction block. Usury ran rampant, and interest, greedy for payments, rose, and trust shattered. Many found profit in war. All right, that concludes my video on Canto 10 of Dante's Inferno. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did like the video, please consider liking it and also subscribing to the channel. Remember that I'm trying to get up to 150 subscribers by the end of September. That's just in a few days, but I'm already at 149 subscribers. So with your help, I think we can get there. Thanks a lot for that in advance. Aside from that, know that you can contact me on Twitter at Brian E. Denton. And also, let's get a little conversation going in the comments below. Let me know what you think about Canto 10. Specifically, let me know what you think of my reading of Canto 10. I'd really like to discuss that, because I do think that this canto in particular is very powerful as it pertains to certain contemporary issues in American politics. All right, with that, just know that we're going to be releasing these videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Usually they're released in the mornings, but this week, for reasons that I got into in the previous video, they're being released in the evenings. So the next video will be released on Friday. Until then, take care of yourselves and others. Hi,